He paid $1,000 for a ghost. Leo Rylance, a man with nothing left but his dog, Duke, thought he was buying worthless scrap metal from an abandoned mountain. He was looking for steel, but his dog found a secret. A single steel plate, welded shut, hiding a concrete bunker frozen in time. Leo just opened a 40-year-old tomb, and in doing so, he unknowingly triggered a silent alarm, alerting the man who built it, a man who is still alive and who will stop at nothing to keep that secret buried forever. Leo Rylance, 42 years old, watched the freezing rain lash the side of his RV. The dim glow of his laptop screen illuminated a face etched with fatigue. His skin was weathered, his short salt and pepper hair stuck out in messy clumps, and several days of graying stubble shadowed his jaw. He pulled the collar of his worn-out, heavy-duty dark brown canvas work jacket tighter. Underneath it, a faded red flannel shirt offered little defense against the cold that seeped through the vehicle's thin walls. This RV, a struggling model from the 1990s, was all he had left since the welding workshop went bankrupt. Beside him on the worn bench seat, a low whine emerged. Duke, a 5-year-old German shepherd, lifted his magnificent head. His thick coat was a rare silver and gray, a stark contrast to the RV's drab interior. His posture was calm, almost noble, but his dark eyes remained intensely watchful, tracking every sound outside. He was Leo's only constant, a silent partner in their shared hardship, rescued from a shelter years ago when times were better. Leo absently scratched the thick fur behind the dog's ears. "I know, boy, I know. Just one more try." On the screen was the county foreclosure auction page. His gaze was fixed on one item. Lot 114, full salvage and demolition rights, White Peak Gondola System. The bidding was stuck at $1,000. It was a liability, a junk asset the county just wanted removed from their land. No one wanted the responsibility. But Leo, a welder by trade, saw something else. He saw tons of high-grade steel in the cables, the towers, and the heavy machinery. Scrap. It was a desperate gamble, but it was a gamble. He typed his name, entered his debit card information, and clicked the button. 3 days later, the RV's engine groaned in protest as it climbed the winding mountain road near Silverton, Colorado. The air grew thinner and colder. They finally parked at the base station, a decaying structure of timber and glass, a relic of the early 1980s. A harsh wind whistled through the empty, cracked parking lot. Leo stepped out, his durable blue jeans already feeling thin against the biting cold. He looked up. The system was a skeleton against the gray sky. Dozens of gondola cabins hung suspended and motionless on the heavy cables, stretching up into the fog. They looked like small coffins, swaying slightly. A high-pitched, metallic squeal echoed down the mountain as the wind rocked them in their rusted grips. Leo felt a shiver of doubt. This was a massive, lonely job. Duke jumped out of the RV, landing softly on the broken asphalt. He didn't bark. Instead, a low growl rumbled deep in his chest. His body tensed, his head high. He stared up at the silent, looming structures, sniffing the cold, metallic air with an unease that amplified Leo's own. "It's just rust, Duke," Leo said, his voice quiet. "Just scrap." But Duke's watchful gaze remained fixed on the mountaintop, as if he were listening to a secret the wind was trying to tell. The main cable line was dead. Starting the massive drive engine at the base station was impossible without a full diagnostic and repairs Leo couldn't afford, so the only way up was the narrow, winding service trail. The climb took them 2 hours. Leo's breath plumed in the thin, icy air, his legs burning from the altitude and the weight of his tool pack. Duke, however, seemed energized by the steep, rocky wilderness. The German shepherd moved with an easy, watchful grace, his silver-gray coat blending with the granite and old snow patches. He frequently paused, waiting for Leo, his dark eyes patient. The summit station was a concrete box half buried in old snowdrifts. The wind here was relentless, a high-pitched moan that sang through the metal towers. Leo forced the rusted service door open with a grunt. Inside, it was dark and colder than the air outside. The main bull wheel, the massive multi-ton pulley that turned the heavy cable, was silent, its thick grease hardened like wax. This, Leo thought, was the prize. The motor and gearbox assembly alone were several tons of high-grade steel. While Leo unpacked his heavy flashlight and a crowbar, Duke started acting strangely. He wasn't whining, but pacing restlessly near the center of the room, his nose to the floor. He stopped directly beneath the giant bull wheel, over a heavy steel maintenance plate bolted to the concrete. It looked no different from the rest of the floor. Duke lowered his head and sniffed the seams intently. Then a series of sharp, urgent barks cut through the oppressive silence of the room. He began digging at the metal, his claws making a sharp, frantic scraping sound against the oxidized steel. "Duke, what is it?" Leo said, his voice echoing. "It's just the floor. Stop that." Duke ignored him, barking again, this time with more force. Leo sighed and walked over, shining his flashlight beam on the plate. It was thick, industrial steel, but as he looked closer, he saw the bolts were just for show. The edges had been sealed, not with caulk, but with thick, crude welding beads. Leo grunted. Why weld a maintenance plate shut? He knew that bark. It wasn't a curious bark, it was the alert bark Duke used when he found something that didn't belong. Trusting the dog, Leo went back to his pack. He pulled out his welding goggles and the portable cutting torch. A fierce, hissing blue flame erupted from the nozzle. Leo knelt and began the slow, loud work of cutting the 4-decade-old welds. Sparks showered the concrete as the torch screamed against the metal. When the last weld was cut, he jammed his crowbar into the seam and heaved. The plate, weighing over 100 pounds, scraped open, revealing a dark square opening and a steep metal ladder. It wasn't a maintenance pit, it was a room. Leo climbed down, Duke right behind him. The air was dry and stale, smelling of ozone and decay. It was a small, concrete-lined bunker. In one corner sat a single chair, a table, and a bank of old, heavy radio equipment. A tattered, heavy wool jacket was draped over the chair, and on the table, next to the radio, lay a small, leather-bound notebook. Leo picked up the notebook. As he did, his sleeve brushed a single red toggle switch on the radio console. Curious, Leo flicked it. Nothing happened. No lights came on. No sounds emerged from the speakers. He shrugged, assuming the batteries were long dead. But deep within the console's hardened casing, a protected power cell, designed for emergencies, expended its last charge. It sent a single encrypted, silent pulse. A distress signal, dormant for 40 years, was now active. Leo, unaware, turned his attention back to the notebook in his hand. Leo sat on the frigid metal chair in the cramped bunker. Duke pressed close, his body a solid, warm presence, emitting a low, anxious whine. Leo opened the leather-bound notebook. The pages were stiff with cold and age, but the ink, written in a precise, slanted script, was clear. It was a diary. The first entry was dated October 1983. "My code name is Jaeger," it began. "I am an agent of the Stasi, and I am defecting. Operation Cold Snap is my only chance." Leo's blood ran colder. He was holding the last words of an East German spy. He read on, piecing together the desperate story. Jaeger was bringing a list, proof of a high-level mole inside the American intelligence services. His contact, the only American who knew the details of the extraction, was a CIA handler codenamed Falcon. The entries, written over several days, grew frantic. "Falcon has betrayed me," Jaeger wrote, the handwriting visibly shakier. The exchange site was compromised. It was an ambush. "I am running, but he is hunting me. I have retreated to the failsafe, this bunker, the one Falcon himself secured for me." Jaeger knew Falcon would kill him, not just for the list, but to bury his own treason. Falcon was the mole. "He knows this room," the next entry read. "He will check here. I cannot stay. He thinks I have the microfilm on my person, but I could not risk it. I have hidden the proof." Leo turned the last page. The final entry was a single, hurried line. "The storm is giving me cover, but he is coming. I must go. I entrust the truth to cabin number 10. Leo looked up from the page, his heart pounding against his ribs. Cabin number 10. He glanced at the tattered wool jacket on the chair, left behind in the agent's desperate flight. Yeager had fled this tiny concrete room, running from the only man who knew he was here, and vanished into the high-altitude wilderness. He must have frozen to death decades ago, his secret frozen with him. A deep sense of violation and fear washed over Leo. This wasn't a salvage yard. It was a tomb. The ghosts of the Cold War were all around him. "Come on, Duke," Leo said, his voice tense. We're leaving this right now." He shoved the notebook deep into his canvas jacket pocket and grabbed his tools. He scrambled up the steep ladder, Duke close behind him. The dog, sensing Leo's sudden panic, let out a sharp, uneasy bark. Leo heaved the heavy steel plate back into place, the sound a dull, heavy scrape of metal on concrete. They hurried across the main engine room to the service door. Leo grabbed the handle, bracing himself for the biting wind. He shoved the door open and was met by a solid wall of white. It was no longer just windy. A full blizzard had descended upon the summit with terrifying speed. The world outside had vanished. A violent shrieking roar filled the air as the wind tore past the building. The snow was not falling. It was a horizontal blinding spray of ice and sleet. Leo stepped back, pulling the door shut against the immense force. He could not see 5 feet in front of him. To attempt the 2-hour hike down the narrow trail in this was suicide. They would be lost in seconds, frozen solid in minutes. He looked at Duke, whose ears were flat against his head. They were trapped. Hundreds of miles away, in a sterile penthouse apartment overlooking the lights of Washington, D.C., an alert appeared on a private encrypted terminal. Arthur Vance, 80 years old, turned his head. He was thin, wearing an immaculate cashmere robe, his posture rigid despite his age. He looked at the alert, his eyes cold and assessing. White Peak Summit, beacon active. A flicker of annoyance, not panic, crossed his features. It had been 40 years. Vance, once known as Falcon, had long assumed the Yeager case was closed. He believed the German spy had frozen to death in the wilderness, taking the compromising microfilm with him. But the room, the bunker itself, was the last loose thread. It was the only tangible thing that tied Arthur Vance to the failed Operation Cold Snap, the only place his treason was documented. He had personally orchestrated the Gondola accident in 1983, using the tragedy to force the permanent closure of the entire resort, burying the bunker under decades of litigation and neglect. Now someone had found it. A salvager, perhaps, or a foolhardy hiker. It did not matter. A loose thread, pulled, could unravel a lifetime of power. Vance picked up a secure line. He did not need to raise his voice. "I have a cleanup request," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "White Peak, Colorado, the summit station." He paused, looking at the blinking red dot. "The old beacon is active, which means someone is inside. Send 2 assets, mountaineering specialists. I want the room sanitized, thermite, and ensure there are no complications, no witnesses." Back at the summit station, the blizzard had become a deafening, violent force. The wind was not just blowing, it was a physical impact against the concrete walls. Leo sat huddled against the cold metal of the bullwheel, his arms wrapped around Duke. The German shepherd was a solid, trembling presence against his chest, a low, constant growl vibrating from his lungs. Then, through the roar of the storm, Leo felt it first, a deep, rhythmic beating that throbbed in his chest. It was a sound that did not belong, a heavy pulse chopping through the wind. Duke ripped himself from Leo's grasp. He scrambled to his feet, his ears flat against his skull. A harsh, frantic bark exploded from him as he rushed to the ice-caked windows. "Duke, get down!" Leo hissed, grabbing his flashlight. But Duke continued to bark, scratching at the frozen glass. Leo crawled to the window, wiping a small circle clear with his glove. His heart stopped. Through the blinding horizontal snow, a dark shape hovered. A sleek, modern helicopter fighting the gale hung suspended perhaps 50 yards from the station. It was black, with no markings. As Leo watched, the side door slid open. 2 figures dressed in black, professional-grade mountain gear rappelled quickly to the snow-covered ground. They moved with a chilling efficiency. The moment their boots hit the ground, the helicopter banked hard against the wind and was instantly swallowed by the whiteout. The two men stood for a second, adjusting the heavy packs on their backs. They looked at the summit station, their forms blurred by the driving snow. Then they began to walk, methodically, toward the service door. Leo grabbed Duke's collar, pulling the dog back into the shadows of the heavy machinery. The cold he felt now had nothing to do with the weather. They were no longer just trapped. They were being hunted. A heavy metallic bang echoed from the service door, loud enough to be heard over the blizzard's roar. Leo scrambled behind the massive, inert gearbox, pulling Duke down with him. The dog went low, his body tense and silent. "This is White Peak Security," a voice shouted, muffled by the wind. "We have a trespasser alert. Show yourself with your hands visible." Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. Security? This resort had been a skeleton for 40 years. It was a lie. He stayed perfectly still, his hand gripping Duke's ruff. The scraping sound of the service door opening was followed by the sharp crunch of boots on the icy floor. Two men, their faces obscured by snow goggles and balaclavas, moved into the engine room. They were silhouettes against the white chaos of the open door, which one of them quickly forced shut. "He's in here," the first man said. "The beacon came from the lower level. Check the bunker. I'll check the machinery." "He's not going anywhere in this storm," the second man replied. Leo watched the beam of a high-powered flashlight cut through the darkness. It swept over the bullwheel, casting huge, skeletal shadows. The man walking the lower level moved toward the welded plate Leo had cut open. "The hatch is open," the man below called out. "He's been in the bunker." "Find him," the first man ordered. A tense, terrible game of cat and mouse began. The station was a maze of frozen metal, gantries, and pits. Leo, a welder and mechanic, knew the layout instinctively. He moved low and fast, his boots silent on the concrete, while Duke padded beside him like a silver-gray shadow. The man on the upper level was methodical. His flashlight beam swept back and forth. Leo and Duke ducked behind a bank of auxiliary engines. "Show yourself," the man yelled. "We just want to talk." As he spoke, a sharp hiss cut the air, and a small dart struck the metal housing just inches from Leo's head, where it stuck, quivering. A tranquilizer. They weren't here to talk. They were here to neutralize him. Fear gave Leo a new clarity. He pulled Duke deeper into the shadows, his back sliding against the ice-cold wall. He had to think. His hand brushed the notebook in his jacket pocket. The diary. He fumbled for it, shielding his small flashlight with his body. He flipped to the last page, the words blurring. "I entrust the truth to cabin number 10. He looked up, past the man hunting him, toward the large, reinforced windows that overlooked the gondola line. Through the driving snow, he could just make out the dark shapes of the cabins, hanging like frozen fruit on the massive cable. "Cabin 10, he whispered. He had to get out there. He spotted the maintenance bay door, the one used to bring cabins inside for repairs. It was a long shot. "Duke," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Watch." The shepherd, understanding the command, turned his back to Leo and faced the darkness of the engine room, his ears pivoting, listening to the approaching footsteps of the second man. A low, menacing rumble started in his chest. Leo moved to the bay door. It was frozen solid. He put his shoulder into it, grunting with effort. The frozen gaskets groaned, and then, with a loud crack of ice, the door slid open a few feet, letting in a blinding, horizontal blast of wind and snow. He stumbled out onto the narrow metal platform. The wind nearly tore him from his feet. He clung to the safety rail, the line of cabins swaying violently just feet away. He saw the faded yellow number painted on the side of the nearest one. 8, then 9, then 10. He reached out, grabbing the freezing metal pole of cabin 10, and hauled himself inside, slamming the flimsy door shut. Inside, the wind was a muffled roar. He was safe for a second. Duke appeared at the open bay door, a dark shape in the whiteout, still watching his back. "The proof," Leo muttered, his fingers numb. "Where?" Duke, seeing Leo was safe inside, stepped onto the platform and pushed his head into the cabin. He barked a single muffled woof and immediately began sniffing and pawing at the cracked vinyl of the rear bench seat. "Here?" Leo asked. He pulled his utility knife. The vinyl was rock hard from the cold, but he managed to pierce it. He tore the cushion open, pulling out handfuls of dry, ancient horsehair stuffing. His numb fingers hit something small, cold and hard. He pulled it out. It was a small, light-proof metal cylinder, no bigger than his thumb. He heard a shout from the engine room. Duke barked, a loud, sharp warning this time. The men had seen the open bay door. They were coming. "Get back inside! Now!" The voice of the first man cut through the howl of the wind. Leo, his fingers clenched around the tiny metal cylinder, scrambled back from the open bay door, pulling Duke with him. The second man was blocking the main service door. They were funneled back into the dark, cavernous engine room, trapped between the two men near the massive silent drive machinery. The massive bull wheel above them was not truly silent. The immense force of the blizzard on the line of heavy, wind-blasted cabins was putting torque on the cable, turning the giant wheel in a slow, agonizing rotation. A constant, low grinding of metal on metal filled the air. The men advanced, their powerful flashlight beams pinning Leo against the gearbox. "The cylinder," the first man said. "Give it to us." The second man, the one who had slipped earlier, raised his tranquilizer rifle, his movements now steady. Last chance. Just as the man's finger tightened on the trigger, Duke acted. He didn't attack. He shot forward like a silver-gray streak, not at the men, but past them, barking loudly, a deep, echoing alarm that filled the metal space. It was a perfect feint. The man with the rifle, startled by the sudden, fast-moving shape in his peripheral vision, flinched. He pivoted on the icy concrete floor, his boots slipping. He fired, but the tranquilizer dart hissed harmlessly, striking a steel girder. It was the only opening Leo would get. His eyes locked on the heavy crowbar he'd left near his tool pack. He grabbed it. He wasn't a fighter. He was a mechanic. He knew what happens when a precision machine is compromised. He put all his weight and desperation into one action, not throwing the crowbar at the men, but at the machine. He jammed the thick steel bar deep into the slowly grinding gears of the main drive. The sound was horrific. It was not a bang, but a deafening, high-pitched scream of tortured metal, followed by a heavy, shuddering thud that vibrated through the floor. The entire station jolted. The giant bull wheel stopped dead. The crowbar, twisted like taffy, snapped and fell, pinning the leg of the man who had slipped. He cried out, a sharp sound of pain. The second man stared, his flashlight illuminating the disaster. His partner was down, trapped by the broken machinery. The wind howled through the structure, which now felt dangerously unstable. He looked at Leo, then at the storm, then at his trapped partner. He made his choice. He turned and fled, disappearing into the whiteout of the service door to save himself. Leo grabbed Duke's collar. "Come on, boy!" They scrambled down the ladder into the secret bunker, pulling the heavy steel plate closed. They were safe, but trapped. Leo looked at the dead radio. Then he looked at his portable torch kit, at the battery pack, the igniter, the insulated wires. He set to work, his numb fingers moving with purpose, bypassing the corroded 1980s batteries, wiring his modern power pack directly to the transmitter. After an hour, a faint green light glowed. He grabbed the microphone. "SOS, Mayday, this is Leo Rylance. I am at the White Peak Summit Station." The storm broke at dawn. Hours later, the heavy thumping of a San Juan County search and rescue helicopter beat the air. They found Leo and Duke huddled in the bunker, cold but alive. They found the injured henchman in the engine room, conscious and suffering from exposure. Leo, his face haggard in the bright morning sun, handed the tiny metal cylinder to the county sheriff. The arrest of Arthur Vance was quiet but swift. The microfilm containing Yeager's original list was undeniable. The man known only as Yeager, who had frozen to death in the wilderness 40 years ago, was finally given a name, his story told, his honor vindicated. Leo's story shows us that even in the coldest, most isolated storm, we are never truly lost if we have a loyal heart walking beside us. That quiet, unwavering bond is what turns a story of survival into a story of hope. If you found a piece of your own heart in Leo and Duke's journey, we hope you'll share that feeling by leaving a like or telling us your own story in the comments. These narratives are a reminder of the good in the world, and subscribing ensures you'll always have a place to find them. Our next story is ready to begin. Just tap the screen.